Welcome to another Delia Secondary Lunch and Learn, informal teacher PD every Wednesday at lunch. So today I'm going to do something a little bit different and talk about a conference I attended last weekend called ReThinking Literacy. And this conference was about how technology is reshaping what literacy is and how it can be best taught in schools. One of the key takeaways from this conference was this idea of print versus digital, this ongoing conversation teachers seem to be having over whether a physical book is better or whether we should be moving towards more digital tools. Now, the conversations and the keynote speakers essentially talked about how we need to move away from this argument, that it doesn't matter which is better, and actually neither is really better, because technology does not equate learning. So what we need to do is focus on pedagogy and just add in the technology as needed. Now, this isn't a new idea, but it was great to kind of have this point driven home, that we focus on pedagogy. Technology is merely a tool. The second takeaway was about visible thinking. Now, this principle seems to have come out of Harvard's Project Zero, where it says visible thinking focuses on making clear these visible thought processes, documenting students' thinking, and then also constantly reflecting on our own practice and getting the kids to reflect on their own thinking. Now, visible thinking strategies that were brought up at the conference included this idea of modeling thinking behaviors for students. We need to model everything. So if we're creating and designing lessons for students, we need to focus on not just regurgitating content, but actually modeling concepts and the thinking behind it. So talking about how this new piece of information fits into the things that we've previously been talking about. So taking those knowledge sets and connections in between. When we're modeling, we're not just modeling, say, a reading comprehension in the English classroom. We're modeling thinking as it fits into all of our different subjects. We also talked at the conference a lot about using tools to help document students' own thinking. So after we've gone over content as a class, letting them use something like video to talk about how they understood the story. So especially for our English language learners, this could be extremely helpful as a way to kind of get their ideas out as a form of pre-writing. Now, we can also use technologies in a way like screencasting, which a lot of teachers have been using at our school lately, to really understand what the thinking processes the students are going through as they're building a project, as they're writing an essay, as they're doing these things in our class, using technology to really document the thinking process so we as educators can react to that knowledge, and we can base our teaching on how our students are understanding the content being presented. And finally, micro-writing, bursts of writing and processing information instead of relying on large projects at the end of units. So this idea of having kids respond to new content as it happens. So whether this micro-writing is a short tweet or a short written response or a short vlog that kind of responds to this new information being presented, the more opportunities we can give students to micro-write and micro-process new information, the more they're going to learn. And this whole idea of visible thinking is really emphasizing this metacognition, getting kids to think about their thinking. And this is not just something that comes in at the end of a unit, but is an ongoing process that we're really focusing on, because students should have wide awake thinking. Adolescence all falls back on formative assessment to inform teaching. So are we doing formative assessments just to check boxes, or are we using formative assessment to really guide our teaching and get students thinking about what they're learning and scaffold them up to where we want them to be? Now, another takeaway from this conference was this idea of multimodalities, or multiple modes of communication, which are coming to be known as new literacies in the 21st century. Now, these new literacies go beyond just text to include film and sound and visual literacy, interfaces like understanding how websites are built, video games as an architecture of communication, space and movement, word as we're familiar with, and actually even textiles. So these new teachers, we need to not just teach them how to read and write word, but read and write all these different modes of communication. As one put it, we need to teach kids to read and write their world. One of the big issues that we're experiencing right now is this idea of awareness of these different mediums without true understanding of how these things work. For example, students are aware of YouTube videos and video in itself, but do they truly understand the language of video angles and cutting and transitions and this language of this new literacy? So just having students use technology to create projects isn't enough. We need to really walk them through the landscape of these new literacies and talk about what different forms of communication. Kind of learning needs to be student-driven. Now, student-centered learning really isn't a new concept, and we've been talking about this a lot in education, but this idea that a true mindset shift where the teacher is no longer the pillar of knowledge in a classroom who teaches and transfers knowledge down to all of the students. This mindset shift truly is this idea of student-driven learning where they're working on their own projects and the teacher is merely a guide that's directing learning without being the pillar of knowledge. When we talk about things like makerspaces, makerspaces are not meant just to be a table in the corner with a sewing machine on it, as one of the speakers talked about, but rather it's this mindset of makerspaces that students need to construct knowledge for themselves. We can't be giving them information. They have to build it for themselves. And we as teachers are just guiding students through experiences where they take on the role of an expert. And if we put them in this role, they may just become that expert that we want them to be. The final note that I took away from this conference was this idea of participatory culture. So as participatory culture is from Henry Jenkins that came out at MIT, and he states that this is a culture in which private persons, like the public, do not act merely as consumers, but also as contributors or producers of content. So in participatory cultures, there are very low barriers to artistic expression and civic engagement. There's strong support for creating and sharing creations, and probably most importantly to me is this formal mentorship that the internet has brought to us. So in participatory culture, this is this idea that we're social and learning social, and we should be using the power of these new technologies to connect with others and learn from others. When we finish, in participatory cultures, participants believe their contributions matter, and we're leveraging technology to build social connections. That is what technology has truly brought us in schools. We can do this through things like Skype, Skyping in experts or Skyping in other classrooms to learn about them. We could do it with things like Blogger and get the kids actually blogging about what they're learning in the classroom and create videos to put on a YouTube. But the key here is that they have an authentic audience. Just putting projects out on the internet and not getting that response back, you might as well just keep it private. So if we're putting kids' work out on the internet, they should have an authentic audience engaging in their content. In Henry Jenkins' paper, he talks about how the digital divide is no longer technological access. This conversation of those who have access to technology and those who don't is becoming obsolete because almost everyone is getting technological access. The new digital divide, Jenkins argues, is opportunities for participation in this connected world of the 21st century. So those were my big takeaways from the Rethinking Literacy Conference. I'll be back next week for the Lunch and Learn informal teacher PD every Wednesday, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we can make this thinking visible for students and what technologies will support these themes going on in literacy.